What's up, folks? I'm Maud, by the way, and welcome to what I'm going to be calling, at least for now, Art Plus Books, or A plus B for short. This is going to be kind of more outlined, a bit more thought out, so hopefully a bit more cohesive than my usual ramblings about art. This time it's basically going to be analyzing what I thought of a book while drawing fan art for it, because I like talking about books and theorizing subtext. Think about it like sort of like a speed paint meets a podcast. So fair warning, I don't intend to make this spoiler free. I'm going to assume that people have read the book, or for some reason want an analysis before they get into it, which, no judgment. I mean, I guess sometimes you just want to know what you're getting into. So today I'm going to be talking about Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves. And I picked up this book about the beginning of the month, actually, a day after my birthday, so in this case, time of recording, February 4th. I'd seen a lot of things mainly on the internet about the book being especially weird and creepy, so I asked for it outright and got it as a gift. Besides knowing it had this wild format and kind of a scary nature to it, I went into the book relatively blind. I had no idea what the story itself was even about till I read the little blurb on the inside of the cover. I think I also heard that there was some sort of unreliable narration at some point, but I really had no idea how deep into this sort of alternate reality the book would go. And yeah, Zampano's book definitely reads sort of like almost like an ARG, an alternate reality game. He's created this kind of whole other world in which this documentary, the Navidson Files, exists and has this grip on a lot of people's minds. Johnny Truant is playing this game, and for some reason, possibly supernatural, he's losing his mind over it. So if there was one word for the subtext I picked up in this book, I would probably say trauma. Real or not, the text definitely creates a monster for Johnny. I don't want to armchair diagnose him or his mom, so this will probably be the only time I mention it, but it seems to be that he's like a guy entering maybe his mid-30s, so I'm wondering if it's supposed to be implied that he's kind of declining into paranoid schizophrenia, which seems to be what his mom has. There's this big centering of mental health in the book overall. And something in Zampano's notes in the afterwards has him wishing that he could basically summon a son to complete his work. I saw this as either some form of curse, or maybe even Johnny picking up on this, which is what might have started his decline, or the uncovering of his trauma. Zampano is sort of this proxy for like an absent father figure in the poor mental state of his mom. I do still wonder what parts of the weird formatting are Zampano's. I mean, he was blind, but he did have people kind of scribing for him. And which could possibly be John's, considering his mom wrote in a similar fashion during her bad moments, again, in the afterword. Or the scrolling could be what triggered some things in John. I think the editor mentions at some point that the weird formatting is Zampano's, but it's never mentioned again. The editor is kind of weirdly another character in the notes. I think if this were a show, though I don't think it would translate well if it were a show, the editor would be the first character focused on, sort of like a filter for the audience to Truant, like he is to Zampano. The whole book has this feeling of discovery, sort of unpeeling something to it. There are obviously some direct parallels between Johnny's monster and the one in the Navidson's file, and really they might be one and the same. Their absence, grief, this uncovering of things that we don't want to exist, like childhood trauma, things that we want to repress and forget. The labyrinth inside the house feels very reminiscent of this too. I'm sure this is a common theme of mazes in a lot of media, but it reminded me of the maze in the HBO adaptation of Westworld. It represents this search for autonomy, for self. Like the obsession with the house or the Navidson Files, it can make you, or unmake you, spiraling you out into madness. I'm no stranger to being so introspective or detached from reality that your anxieties can feel all-consuming, or like you're not even alive or human. Similar to John's dream about being the Minotaur, which is what I based this piece off of. The illustration itself is obviously very symbolic and includes a lot of elements from the book, like the flares and the staircases, and of course the maze and the Minotaur. I also definitely went for something a bit different than my usual style. It's very line work heavy. It's fairly rugged almost, and very, very two-toned. Initially I thought that maybe I could add a little bit more color to it, but I really liked the kind of black and white versus red idea, and that the color was kind of introduced with the red of the flare and the Minotaur's eyes. Ironically, I think this dream was the beginning of the end for John's negative experience. Sometimes what helps is just putting something out into the open, talking, writing, screaming. It can feel taboo, but eventually if you give the monster a name, it becomes real and defeatable. It's almost ironic for me kind of analyzing the book like this, especially when it comes to just analyzing Johnny as a character. At some point, I kind of started to resent the hyper-analysis and the notes of the Navidson files, especially if it's supposed to be like a real thing in this universe. It feels intrusive, mainly because the characters feel so human. This also kind of helps with the feeling of hope as both stories conclude, though. I heard a lot of feelings of dread and fear toward the book, but I only felt sympathy as these characters underwent these trials. Were they necessary? And maybe in the sense of being purely cerebral, represented by the physical pains that the characters went through. Because even this book realizes that trauma does not make you more resistant to trauma. It just makes you more traumatized. But the physical nature of the harm does represent a lot about what we can't see with mental health. The healing required, the long-term consequence and irreparable damage. But maybe the hope we can have, not that it will be forever fixed, but that it will get better. So, yeah, that was basically my short analysis into Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves. I'm gonna probably leave this here. This was basically an essay at the end of the day, and I could probably still talk about it for weeks, but I feel like I'd go into my own spiral about it. I really hope you enjoyed this, and I will see y'all next time. So if there was one subtext if there was from reality that it could Daniel Z. Lelewski's. 1 second. No, that was totally wrong.